whose collected essays were ghost written. I believe it's true that if you get a copy of a book and you get it signed, it goes down in value. So I encourage you not to do that. But if you do want it signed, please come to me tomorrow. Particularly, it would be a good time to do it in the middle of reviews. That would be the best time. Let me thank Theo and Patrick and Rob and, is it Shayal? Where are you? Shajay. Is it the name of a kind of stick food on a stick, or what is that thing called? No. Sorry. And Brett, I have to thank Brett. I'm tired of thanking Brett. But I thank Brett yet again. I have a really deep affection for the DRL. I don't know, if you read some of the things I've said about it, it doesn't sound like deep affection. But we are joined, I believe, in the problem of pure research and architecture. What is pure research? Is there such a thing as pure research? And I believe every discipline has it. And it gets tedious to have to constantly explain that there's a role for research, like to have Tom Main come, so you're not out in the real world and all that sort of stuff. And so, so some of the things I say tonight are going to have to do with the fact that I really feel myself forced to reassess the question of pure research in light of the current situation. Also, pure research has to, at a certain point in time, it grows. For example, if you were in physics, there was a time and occasion you did a lot of work on frictionless work. When almost all of Newton's physics was based on frictionless work, but you didn't just stay frictionless. At some point you introduced friction. Friction turned out to be not only important, it kept the whole world together, and you're alive because of it. So you bracket stuff out in order to keep going. At a certain point in time, you got to face the facts, you got to quit bracketing out, and you add stuff to it. Then that's where we are, and so we want to talk about that a little bit tonight. So there's two things I want to tell you. I had some stuff on my mind because I knew I was coming to DRL. I want to tell you what I think about where I think it is now, where I think I am now. And then I also did a show in which I trying to put some of these ideas together. They will not look at all alike. I think the name of, but I'm going to try to connect them in my conversation. The name of the lecture, I think, is something like In Praise of Torpor, Lassitude, in praise of Sloth, Torpor, and other forms of lassitude, which is going to be one of the themes. Could also have been called, and now for something completely different, although I've quoted the Monty Python for so long, it's kind of tiresome, and you kids in the audience don't even know who Monty Python is. But if you were sitting in the room at all today, what you're about to see is going to look really different, and I invite you to appreciate and enjoy the dessert. So, I have to do this now because I'm old. State of pure architecture. Okay, turn on the slides. Okay, start design. Start from the beginning. This is the Cambrian Explosion. I don't know if you know what the Cambrian Explosion is. The Cambrian Explosion is one of the most interesting periods in the history of the evolution of biological forms. There was a strange period, exactly 541 million years ago, in which, I'll just step away briefly, the numbers of species, which was extremely small, took off for still not quite yet well-known reasons, and exploded into the largest number of species that have ever existed in history. From the end of the Cambrian Explosion to today, it's been declining. So two arguments have been made why, and both of them are probably collaborate. One is an incredible amount of resources, an explosion in available resources. And the other one is an explosion in the biochemistry of body building, the ability to build new bodies. So those were the two that collaborated. Fantastic explosion of new species, and that constitutes the Cambrian Explosion. Thank you. This would be what? Oh, thank you. This is the Cambrian Explosion. Okay. Sure. All right. So, and here's another picture of it, just in case. Okay. So not many, and then a whole lot. Now, in my personal opinion, architecture has just gone through its Cambrian explosion in the last 30 years. I think it's the most important period of architectural history. I don't know how it will be assessed. We don't particularly think that all the species in the Cambrian period were very important. Like, we weren't there, for example. There were no mammals. There were just a whole lot of gooey things in the ocean, for that matter. But so we don't think of it as having very good design, just a lot of it. So it may match pretty damn well, actually, when you think about it. But one thing is true: the amount of resources devoted to architecture, the ability to build, the capacity, the types of materials that were available to build with, the accomplishments of engineers, the resources that were thrown at it all over the world, and the interest in architecture. Nothing has ever been like it, and you know the results of what you've been seeing. DRL, and that has produced a kind of culture of architecture which has come to an end. I mean, the Cambrian explosion is over. Now, we're not going to go back to the pre-Cambrian period. We're going to go down. But I do think things are going to be different now. And I want to talk a little bit about what the consequences of that are. The DRL, me, Patrick, Zaha, virtually everybody in this room that's still in this room, we got born then. We're one of the gooey things in the ocean. And so that's what, that's kind of what this talk is about. So I've been working with Alejandro. Alejandro is sort of interested in this problem at Princeton, and we've been having a lot of conversations about it. In my mind, also, certain problems are coming to an end, an end game. For example, I think any use of indexicality whatsoever as a form of authentication, I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in it whether it's a vector primitive, whether you're mushing something around in Maya or Rhino, or I'm not interested in self-calculating forms. I think Fry Otto has never been interesting. He can't even get his name in the right order. I mean, who puts his last name first? The guy's name, sorry, it's Fry, Otto. I know all you guys love him. But I certainly think it's an area of interest, but it has certainly played to a certain end game. So I want to suggest some alternatives to what we do. I am interested in, there's nothing wrong with what we've accomplished there, but I don't think it's a bit like frictionless pulleys. And there's some other interests. But my basic idea is, what are the best projects for architecture? Architecture, for me, is not about direct instrumental performances of building, although I am interested in that. Who in their right mind would not be interested in that? For me, architecture's best and most important project has been, or the one that I'm most interested in, is its existential project, a degree to which it takes up a psychological and existential problem. Now, understand that architectural history, because it couldn't build a whole lot of stuff until the middle of the 19th century, only had two projects, a symbolic project and an aesthetic project. That was it. I mean, it basically worked on certain kinds of basic forms that it could do with load-bearing walls and certain types of ornamentation, and almost the entire literature of that is governed by an aesthetics and symbolic project. It's really not till Wolfland, I don't think, that something really deepens. And I think in Renaissance and Baroque, when he starts to talk, he uses the empathy theory argument to start to talk about something else. And he starts to move it into a more psychological project. And so he raises the possibility of architecture in a kind of Hegelian way, of architecture as being a way we learn about ourselves, the body as a place of the growth and evolution of the subject. So he sees the Renaissance as how we understand our part-to-whole relationships, and so it form, part-to-whole and consinity and proportions. He sees the Baroque as the continuity. So the wrist the hand is separate from the arm, and there's the wrist. However, they're also one thing. There's one joint. And so he opens this idea that the architecture is teaching us about who we are and what we are as a body. And I thought that was really an important moment for me. It's a particularly important moment to me because it happens almost exactly the same time as Freud. So about 3 years after Wolfland writes Renaissance Baroque, Freud is in Paris with Charcot, and he's studying hypnosis. Have I already told you all this story so many times you've heard it? Okay. So he makes through one of the great breakthroughs in his career, and he notices, for example, that patients that have genuine paralysis of the hand, their muscles atrophy in their arm, because he, as an anatomist, the arm muscles are connected to the hand, and if you can't use the hand, they atrophy. But patients that have hysterical paralysis of the hand, their arm muscles don't atrophy. And you know this because occasionally under hypnosis you could relieve their... so what actually was paralyzed was the hand, was the word hand, the idea of the hand. And so right before Freud is discussing this, Wolfland has basically made the same kind of argument in his relationship between the Wolfland and the Baroque. And, I think that's very interesting. It's not till the 20th century, till frame structure, to standardized production, to egalitarian politics, to neo-Marxism, that you start to see architecture taking up much wider and much more ambitious social projects. So the entirety of what we think of as modern architecture and its various social ambitions is a 20th century phenomenon. And it's also when the possibility of many architectural projects happens. And that's where we are today. We live in a world of many possible architectural projects. And so to pick one or the other, I don't think, it just doesn't make sense. This is where I sort of disagree with Patrick's hegemonic, monolithic desire to take over the entire world and turn it into a project for his practice, which is kind of nice. It's a good business model for sure. So this is, I'm sorry about the picture, this is the genre space of pop music. This is an algorithmically calculated capture of the genre. Here, I'll show you a close-up. So this is, these are all of the genres and subgenres of pop music that identify themselves as this, as they list themselves on various record and listing services. So you can see stuff like, I should use this thing. So, and as things get close to each other, they're all related to each other. For example, Malaysian pop is related to Russian ska, Indian pop, Spanish pop, math pop. Math pop is damn good. So this is a way, this is the Cambrian explosion of music due to computer technology and digital technology. I love this. At the bottom of this, there's a picture, there's classical music, it's got one list, it's got piano and classical music, but of course if you're in classical music. So this is sort of where I think we actually already are in architecture. I believe that. But we don't yet have the intellectual and the categorical, and we don't really have the skills nor the discourse to understand how to, I don't know what the word would be, the only person who ever tried this, those of you that are 100 years older or older like me, is Charles Jenks with those fantastic evolutionary trees. He is finally going to find his place in the world. But it's pretty impressive. And this is my picture of the kind of way I would like to advocate architecture. But again, this is a Cambrian explosion model. So anyway, to make a long story short, I'm now going to show you some work that I'm doing that tries to take some of this into consideration. And this requires a few values. I told you I think that the indexical model, I'm no longer interested in it. I'm no longer interested in, it's not that I'm not interested. I think we now have them in our palette. I don't need it anymore. We have in our palette virtually everything you can do with a vector primitive. So I'm interested in looking at every possible architecture left that we don't need vector primitives, because I don't really want to just hand those over to Richard Meyer and Zumthor and bad Herzog and Muron and stuff like that. I mean, although I love some of their stuff. So I think there's life to be had in those things. I think that we have finished certain existential projects. I think I'm tired of rectitude. I'm tired of every building standing up straight and looking young and healthy. I, for example, don't stand up straight very often. I kind of lean over a lot. In fact, by the end of the day, I'm leaning over quite often. I oftentimes After a few drinks, I'm leaning on complete strangers. There's sometimes water beneath me. I'm not sure where it came from. So I feel like I have a right to have my architecture speak to my existential niche. I'm tired of conquest in architecture. I'm tired of the conquest of nature. I'm tired of the conquest of gravity. I'm tired of 90-degree cantilevers. Those are just about as boring as you can get. So you can lift a barbell. You know, I'm tired of macho architecture. Frankly, I'm at least sick of macho architecture. Wolf's not around, is he? Oh, okay. Some of my best friends are, kind of. And so I do think there's some, those are kind of finished projects. I have a whole list of finished projects here, but I think that's on this list. Let me just make sure I just turned my volume up. Oh, yeah. More finished projects. I'm tired of tragedy. I'm tired of loving nature. In fact, yeah, like the salt thing we saw today. So I'm like comedy, dependencies, lassitude, fiction, sloth. These are the things I'm after. Yeah, and I'm because I just feel entitled to it. And I know some of you, I know you, Mark, for example, hurt often as I do. So I'm for you. Okay, so here's the deal. So I got asked by Peter Eisman we did a project for the Venice Biennale, the last Venice Biennale, and it was a reflection from my own theoretical point of view, and PV did one, and Peter Eisman did one, on the Campo Mazzo project of that guy. And what's his name? Piranesi. Wait, better have some more thoughts. Okay, here comes a couple of thoughts. And then I read a lot of philosophy, a whole lot of philosophy, and then I spent a lot of time with Mark. He kept saying, man, you got that wrong, man, you got that wrong. I get a little tired of having Mark Cousins just tell me I got everything wrong. Like Derrida wrong, Deleuze wrong, Kant wrong, Hegel wrong, Foucault wrong, Kipnis wrong. Anyway, I found this book by a guy named Leibniz, and it's called The Monadology. It's 9 pages, and each one's one sentence, And one of the sentences says, this philosophy gives you the greatest possible diversity with the most coherence. And I thought, I'm not even going to read the rest of the sentences. I'm just going to say, that's my philosophy. So that's what I wanted to do. So that's the jungle philosophy. I call that the jungle. You can have the monoculture philosophy, which is Patrick's philosophy, the perfect monoculture, and his is a good monoculture. No question, he's got it. And that's why the parametric style is so important, because it announced the power of this possibility. In fact, what I'm going to be suggesting tonight is an alternative to what I call Patrick Schumacher's synthetic parametric style, and that's what I'm calling the analytic parametric technique. And I will describe that tonight. But anyway, so this is a jungle. This is all these things I've been talking about. And the way we did it is really simple. We took this drawing, very famous drawing, particularly famous, important to me, because most of my work in the last 10 years, as you'll read in that book and some other places, is to constantly understand architecture's beginning point. The place it begins, it's existential, it's political, it's theoretical, it's social argument is in its relationship to the ground. It is the only object that we know that we treat as personal property that acts as real property in law, for example. And so to act as real property, but to be personal property, means it has a particular kind of status, which is why Corb was so interested in getting it off the ground. It's why the 20th century has seen the evolution of, there's no such thing as the ground in architecture, but it starts as land and goes from land to datum. Corb is datum, then datum to field, and field to urban field, and field from urban field to cosmopolitan field, and now from cosmopolitan field to what I call here the fictional field, and eventually you'll see a little bit later. So the proliferation of projects in the 20th century has also been followed by the proliferation of possible ways we relate to the ground, and to me that's the most important issue. And the great thing about this drawing is it's a drawing of a city that has no plan on the ground. It's monuments and fantastic architectural imagination on with no, I mean, look at it, just take a look at it. It's complete nonsense. I don't know. Also, try to pay attention to this one thing right here. You see that little thing right there? It becomes really important later on. So we took this, very simple, then we analyzed it. The way I analyze drawings, I mean, things like this, is I hand them to a guy from India who, and I say, please draw 10,000 drawings, don't stop till you get up to 10 lines, don't stop till you get up to 10,000 lines, make the lines mean something in relationship to drawing. So we got up to 10,000, we found out that almost everything points north and south until it gets slightly to the river, and then it kind of inflects a little bit, and that's it. So we've completely analyzed this. Pretty good, don't you think? See, there's that thing again. Then, independent of this analysis, we construct at least 6 I can think of, 6 completely different genre of architectural species, and then we populate this diagram with those species according to the overlay on the relationship to this map. So, and you can see this in the map, this is the Naval Academy, and then we turn it into a spiral comes there, then it becomes here. So this is that thing here, then it becomes that big dog right here. Yeah. So all of these, there's more to it. So as we populate it, then we get this model. And in order to understand the population better, we construct a narrative. So there's heaven, there's the known earth, and there's hell. And we put Firminy Church as heaven, and we put Peter Eisman as hell. Then we decided to make everything come to life. So we stuck a pipe in Firminy Church, and everything else is brought to life. And in fact, this is Jose Uberi's Miller House, and the gates to hell are the shadow of the Miller House turned into House 2. You'll see it, stuff like that. So it's just one game after another after another. Then the way we actually constructed so this is it. So, and there's stuff going on underground and stuff like this. Fantastically fun model. So then didn't want to be original. I'm not an architect. So we then got my friends. So this is Stan Allen. This is Andy Zago, Paranese, Jesse Reiser, Nanako Umamoto, Peter Eisenman, Greg Lynn, some guy, old guy. It must be Pantheon or Parthenon. Which one is it? Pantheon. Yeah, old guy. Yeah, Uberi. And then we started to play with them. Sometimes we just did silly things with them. We put a pipe in them, so Jose looks over the thing. Sometimes they're just as one of a kind, so with a little game, played with them. And then other times we took them, like these are Taiwan port terminal turned into snails, like a dish of snails on some ice. Now there's a ton of stuff in this about the ground. I'm just not going to go into it because it's a whole different lecture. Now this is a really interesting project. This is a project by Andy Zago called the Contortionist Project. The building comes up, goes all the way around, comes through. There's a mirror on the bottom. There's no column on the bottom. Really beautiful building. This has the kind of qualities I was talking about. No index forces, no mushed around. And so I became really interested in working with this. So what we did was there it is, and we just decided to bring it to life. We kind of unfolded it. And let me just show you how it unfolds. Now this is generally where because I'm on Windows 8, but I don't know how to use it, so I have to use a program that fakes it into Windows 7. So just give me 1 second. So let me just show you one of these. Then we make these little things. Okay, and then that way we didn't get enough that way, so we then did this. Okay. So that's where they came from. Now the principle of analytic, and by the way, this is not a gag when I talk about this. The principle of analytic parametricism is that every one of those variations, every different moment in them has a different performance. And so we started to do studies of every possible performance. And, so every figural variation will have a contextual or a point of view performance, or it can be made to perform different in terms of the standard environmental performances. And so this is what I mean. The idea of an analytic parametricism is you do not display the style of the parametric ambitions subordination to the forces it's indexing. You design what you want, and then you use the power of parametricism to make it engage the building performance. Oh, did I go the wrong? And then at the end you can, because I want them to move in relation, or appear to be moving in relationship to the ground. And then you will see this idea throughout So I think of this as, go back and we study each one of these frames and find out what its particular performances are. And those performances can be contextual, or they can be building performances. But that will bring us later on to a different issue that makes the problem slightly more complicated. So then we study these a little bit more. Hang on. I wanted to put sex in the whole Torpor thing. You'll see. I don't know. Why can't buildings have sex? I don't know. And then so we populated it. This is Stan Allen's Maribor on top of his Kansai library, and all the stars are based on the Kansai library. It just goes on and on. Then another one we invented for ourselves is called the Captain Dust group. And the Captain Dust group are all based on this idea. We found this three-dimensional tangram that was able to make all these figures. And so we made our own three-dimensional tangram and then made all these figures, and then turned them into architecture. And so this is sort of like you see this guy's got his knees crossed, and then he smiles. and then we made them out of put magnets on them and threw a bunch of junk on them. And then, anyway, then we did all these tests. Then there's the ants of hell, and there's just tons, and there's 5 species. These are the they get organized with a spiral. This is these are the pasta architecture. There's pasta, every possible pasta. Stuck it all on there, made a gigantic mess. This was homage to the South, the context, racial conflict in the United States. I don't know. So this is what you do when you're bored and have a little extra money, like a lot of extra money. And here it is. This is the Miller house reflected into house 2, and goes on and on. So it's a gigantic thing, and it's a mess from below. I mean, it is a jungle from below, but it has a high degree of order from below. So that was last year. Got invited to SciArc to do an exhibition. We decided to study those further. And the reason, and as we studied those further, I picked 3 of the ones to develop further, and this is what you're seeing. Now, there are 2 things that are really important to me. Architecture is really important to me, and art exhibitions are really important to me. A lot of the thinking and work on this is about this art exhibition, which I'm not going to be discussing with you tonight. Like, it's got paintings in it, it's got sculpture in it. I work very hard on art exhibitions, and I'm particularly, actually on art shows, and I'm particularly interested into them because I don't like didactic art exhibitions. I don't like documentaries. I like fictions, I like movies. And I like to create those environments in art shows because I like the people in the show to be as much in a show as the stuff. I don't want the objective, reflective point of view. I would like them to be in an immersive, narrative point of view. So I'm not going to go into that. But so this is the show. This is everybody really happy at the show, like millions of happy people. Just here's some paintings just to show you this painting. Beautiful painting this is a painting with a mirror by. Maurice Clifford. Is a painting by accident called Mirror by Fabio Marcaccio. It's a really brilliant painting. These are Beverly Stevens's dolls. She goes out and finds pieces of mulberry trees. This is my wife, in case you don't know this. Finds a little face in them that's in the tree and then paints them. And then it turns out that her little tree had an incredible resonance with all this other stuff. So I'm going to show you mostly the development of these 3 classes. So this was the walkers. We're now developing the walkers. So when we got them there, we then also put skin on them. And the reason I put these clothes on them is because everywhere I go, like if I did the show here, I would want it to reflect some of my interest in what people like. Elena does a lot of work on Ellen and Manfredini does a lot of work on clothing, and so we put clothes on all this stuff. But nevertheless, each of these things are supposed to solve real building functions, and also, in other words, it's supposed to lend themselves to the idea of the analytic parametric. Now, the other issue I would like to introduce to you that's probably going to be most anathema is the one thing about research that I think we need to introduce today is the thing that's never going to go away, that's become increasingly important, that I've spent the last 30 years teaching architecture students not to learn and to point out that it's the death of the discipline and that you've never learned it in school, is the building type. You have never learned, you've never taken a class on schools, you've never taken a class on hospitals, you've never taken a class on building types. You don't learn architecture well by studying building types. You learn architecture well by studying construction systems, structural systems, and formal types, because that's where you're in control of the most interesting effects. Like a courtyard building can be any of those things, but you know how it performs. Studying a building type is basically a stupid waste of time. However, they're never going to go away. So if you really want to know what I think the first friction we need to start putting back into our education is actually learn the expectations of the building types in the client world now, because there is no such thing anymore of, in post-Cambrian Explosion architecture, the building type is already starting to take over. It's taking over. Every competition has a pre-competition judging where the building type is judged according to building type standards in the field. So in a very short period of time, it's accelerated its importance, and I'm starting to think, okay, we need to do this. So all of these buildings are tested against a building type. These are tested structurally against, they're structurally sound at 200 meters, but also their platforms and circulations and all that sort of stuff work. This is a duplex out in the country, so we don't give a damn. Hicks live in it. But they have... And so I'll show you a little bit of study on that one, and then, and where's my guy where's my salt guy? You recognize this? Oh, you gotta be kidding, you fraud. You don't recognize this? Does anybody recognize this? You old frauds. If you were my age, you'd think, oh, this is brutalism meets Baccioni. If you were a kid, you'd say, Minecraft, it's a voxel tower. You don't recognize a voxel tower when you see one? So I tell you, all these kids came in and said, oh, look, it's Minecraft, some stupid game. I've never even seen that thing. So, but that's the point. And then these things are supposed to, this is about the ground. This is the earth. This is how architecture always constructs a new ground when it meets the ground. Now, here is the perfect example of analytic parametricism. This is... I gotta be careful not to call it eating chicken. Chicken eats. Say it again? Chichen itza. See, the trouble with eating chicken is you'll never get that out of your head. So this is the descent of cuckoo land. So once a year at the equinox, the snake, the shadow of this snake, comes down. It takes about 2.5 hours, and when it comes down, and then it meets the head. And people come from, feet around just to see this thing, hundreds of feet. What's funny, if you show up with a camera, they charge you $60, but if you show up with a tripod, they charge you $650 because you're a professional photographer if you have a tripod. Now, why I think this is interesting is this is a parametric performance based on an analysis of the form, but the form is it's pre-designed. It's like this is the this is Mayan whatever you call it style. It's very like all the other ones, and so this one unique case was a minor application of the kind of parametric thing. We could if we wanted to make snakes wrap around the world 24 hours a day with a shadow, and we could do it in 8 different religions, and we could see it from, it would be kind of a waste of time to do that, but as a proof of concept, we could do it with cities all over the world. We could animate the earth from somewhere else using the shadow of the sun. It would be fantastic. And so this is the best example I could give you of it. All of this started for me, this idea of moving away from, because I'm one of the people who actually really fell in love with the vector primitive and, loved, hated, but was never that much interested. I sort of started with these forms. Every time I land at at Newark, I see these things, and, they're not in motion, but the family of them, the idea that they make such a beautiful herd, and that they're not imitating anything. They belong entirely, and they're not, they weren't made this way, but they do it so perfectly. Also opened the idea up to me of something else that I think would be really interesting today, and that's the idea of a non-local contextuality. For the last 40 years, we've worked on the idea of local contextuality. But if we introduce not bodies, but figurality gets us into a new way of relating to the ground, but it also raises the possibility that we can put figures in different cities that relate to each other, different locales, and build family relationships that are no longer not local, just like most of your actual relationships of exchange today are non-local. So the idea that architecture is grounded in the authentic community for architecture was always the local community of exchange. That's where site relationships came from. So we have knee-jerk relationships that we have to be contextual and we have to relate to the site. We have to relate to the site because we're fixed on the site. And I agree that we should stay fixed on the site. That's how we become real estate. One thing that happens when buildings start to move is the law changes. And I strongly discourage the robotics. I encourage robotics as much as I can until it becomes the walking city, because we lose all kinds of power when we become personal property. But you see these in various ports, and they relate to each other. And I thought there is an enormous possibility in this figurality, as long as we don't fall back into either a phenomenology or a representation of the body. So these are Carumba tests of the figures. Carumba is a finite element analysis that you can download if you're a student, or most institutions, and you can get the 64-bit. You should have this on your desk. It's interfaced with Rhino and Grasshopper. We use Cricket. Cricket is when you hit rhinos with a big bat, But why don't they name them normal things? Like, what is Rhino and Cricket? Grasshopper? And what's the popcorn one where you unfold something? Pipakura. And, is there such a thing as reverse Pipakura? That's the one I wanted to invent. Okay. So I showed you these films. And then we tested these things in 3 structural systems. Now this is me. This is the Torpor. This is where my heart is. I honestly, God, we did all these sloth tests. This is what I really wanted to do, like laying down. This was supposed to be like a column. I couldn't get the kids that did the show actually did this. They really wanted to do the group. But, pooping, just, So this is actually when you're only place you're going to see sloth and lassitude, but at least it shows you so we tried all these things, and then that was good. That's kind of how I feel right there a lot. And then we figured out how the pile up was, and then they fell in love with this, and that's what they say. Now, one thing I have to tell you is plan 2 things when you're planning a show. Not only the door you have to get out, but the door you have to get in. Like, you see this? There's just 2 days trying to figure out how to get this thing actually into the gallery. It turned out, it's very funny. When we got the bubble wrap off, we got the 1.5 inches necessary to get in, and it was just a miracle. By the way, the shipping company that came to pick this stuff up in Ohio walked in, looked at it, turned around, and walked out. We're not putting this is too valuable. I said, it's not valuable, it's mine. I don't care, we can't put this in, we'll break it, you'll sue us. So we got a gigantic U-Haul, packed it in there, and then the 2 of the people that built it drove. So that's that figure. And so you can see various, so this is I don't like 90-degree cantilevers, but all of these are incredible cantilevers, and they're, as any good engineer would tell you, a non-90-degree cantilever is much more difficult. These are much more, the nonlinearity, the calculation of forces would be impossible today without finite. Is that right? So these are really impossible to do. Plus they have codependent structures, and their force is spread out all over this island. This is like a gigantic snow boot. And these are boots, and it's supposed to have, well, never mind. It's supposed to be anatomically correct. This is a female. And different clothing. Those are better. Sorry. I'm actually out of things to say about this, but I had a lot of pictures, so I shouldn't. By the way, I'm always asked, why am I talking about the ground and not about the sky? And the answer is really simple. The sky just doesn't matter in architecture anymore. It mattered for most of architecture. It was born mattering. The pyramids are probably more about the sky, building meeting the sky, than meeting the ground. Although they're both about both. There's no doubt that in that form, the ascension to the heavens of life is really powerful. But by the time you can build taller and taller and taller, the buildings get less and less interesting, and when you go up to the top of them, you can't see anything because they just suck. No one cares anymore about a tall building. Plus, we've been to the moon. Like, you know, we just, that little blue thing up there that's not even up there when you go up, we don't care about it anymore. You know, so what's interesting about the top of a building now is figuring out the architecture of making the thing in there, not going on. So, I think KPF really did an interesting thing with base metal top, but when John Haydick put hair on the top, because your hair doesn't make you go past the top. It really has a way of shrink wrapping the space around the top of the building, and I think it's a fantastic way to work. This is something about, but one thing would be great is if we could just put a sky like that. That would be good, like a gigantic concrete thing up at the top that the buildings could relate to. Then we could get started again with the tops. So this is the gallery. Okay. Now the problem with this one was, the feature of this that we were most interested in is how agile it was from point of view. So I don't know if you know the Sierra Tower by Pelly in Philadelphia. It's a weak form tower. It's a it's a prismatic tower that every time people go to Philadelphia, get in a car, take a cab around the thing, take pictures around it. It's like a different building all around. So that idea's been around for a very long time. Andrew Zago and I have worked on it for a very long time. And so we tried to make these Captain Dust figures highly agile in terms of point of view, so that they would go from figurality to not figurality, because we wanted the durations of the figure to also go from very fast, as the walkers do, to very slow. We were hoping no one would even notice this, but it had a figurality. And so, so the idea was to figure out the place. Also, it has little children. See, it's got little bitty babies. In fact, it's pregnant. I don't know why the magnets thing happened. I just wanted it. One thing I needed to do is to have the thing on the ground. I didn't want another white thing about it. I really wanted these to be iron filings, because I remember that Mona Hatoum piece where she put iron filings all over the thing, and I couldn't, it's too messy. And so, part of it is see if we could get, just how we could get it to, there's the mouth, we couldn't get the mouth to work, but just to get it to engage with various, how did I get back in there? Anyway, it's supposed to blend in with things. So most of the work with this was just to get it in various points of view and just to get it built. This was the one we started early, so I had worked on it for a year. And then this one, I guess I've kind of given the way. This is about as straightforward a high-rise building as you can get. Brutalist, some reference to Italian surrealism, highly grounded, but is supposed to, where am I going backwards? Oh yeah, see how the mirror turns into a clown? Which way am I? Oh yeah, so you'll see now. So you can see, this was positioned so it changes points of view, but also blends in with this. So it looks like one figure. And you'll see later on some of the contextual shots. And so there's no question about the ease of building this, the absolute straightforward ease of building this, and the floor plates. And so you get, that's about the most standard shot you could get. But then there it is in Minecraft. And there it is walking away. Now just for some silly renderings of stuff in the city. Here we are testing the non-local contextualism. I do. I don't know. Doesn't look quite torpor enough. Now, this is about changing points of view in the city. This is his son, and this is the dad. And so they just perform really different. They're very agile for very little inflection, I think. It's just the idea. It's nothing much more than that. It looks, when I said, look, I want to do this, I said, go watch Son of Godzilla. I don't know if you've seen it, but you know, Godzilla's trying to teach his son to blow fire, and he keeps blowing smoke rings. And I'm sorry, this is like, I am just turning into Charles Jenks in public. I realize that now. At least I have a sense of humor about it. Now, Andy Zago, my close friend who started all this, has gotten super excited about this, and I'm not so sure I'm doing him a favor, but this is his. This is it. I don't think he's quite got the idea of not macho. But he's just done a beautiful installation that you should see in LA at the he's redesigned the interior of Overup, and it's all based on this language. And that's it. Thank you. Yeah, questions?
Any questions, guys?
Did pretty good. Check to see. One good question I always ask is, read your notes and tell me what you left out.
Well, in that case, did you leave anything else out about the swamp? I mean, sorry, the jungle.
The jungle.
I asked the jungle because in the unit we always call it the swamp, and the way you describe it is obviously much more interesting than the way we describe it. So, in a way, I wanted to hear a bit more about it.
More jungle. Jungle is a concept actually introduced to me by Carl Chu. And it's basically his argument of, you know, when I'm showing those genre spaces, my belief is that the thing about the jungle is that it's got so much diversity, but it's incredibly, it's sensitively interrelated in an almost profound way. And so it's not, the thing about it is not pluralism, it's not about difference. The two things it has to have is gigantic diversity and an incredible coherence. And it can't have water on the bottom. That would make it a swamp. I mean, you know, I get it. Yeah. But obviously, what is it you wish I'd said?
Well, I just want to hear more about it, because the way we talk about the swamp is also this deep ambiguity.
Well, it's like a jungle out there. I don't know how I keep from going under. Don't push me. Is that how the words go? I can't really remember. Yeah, I'm close to it. You don't even know what we're talking about, you little kid. You weren't there at the birth of rap. That was Grandmaster Flash's first hit. Thank you, intelligent people. Any other questions? Did that help your unit or not? Didn't that help your unit? I was thinking that nobody's gonna like this, but Natasha might. It's kind of got stuff in it. You needed it? All right.
Right.
Oh, an engineer.
Engineer.
Don't tell them I lied about it. By the way, I got a question for you too.
Right, who goes first? Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first.
I mean, the work you've displayed is quite interesting, the way you're quite clear about how it's grounded, issues of cantilever. And what's also quite interesting is on one of the pieces you mentioned the fact that its relationship to the sky and how you like it. But you never talked about tension structures.
About
What's
what?
your tension? Something hanging. What's your views on that?
Maybe I should ask my question first. Then you'll know a little bit about your question. So Andy Zago did a competition project, and all the Carumba things came out and had a lot of red in them. and he took it into Photoshop and turned them to blue, and turned it in. Would that work?
Architecturally or structurally?
I think what his idea was, if he wins the competition, he can fix it later. Tension structures, we're really not revealing our thinking on that at the moment. It being none.
Jeff, I think it'd be nice to hear your thoughts on urban scale. Like, for instance, you talk about the jungle, so lots of difference, but some kind of coherence.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the work, you've started showing a number of them together. But for instance, if there was a master plan, would you have one architect, for instance, construct the entire master plan and do the kind of maneuvers you did there? Or would you set a series of principles in which this would be fun?
The way I approach understand something, the Biennale project, I was the master planner. And everybody worked for me, and there were teams that did different projects. There was the Captain Dust team, each team had a different name. In the exhibition, all I was the writer, producer, and I'm talking about producer as the guy who paid for it. So I basically said, and so they didn't do what I said. In fact, not one thing in there is the way I want it to be. But it's okay. I mean, I was kind of interested in that. But even in the master plan, there were sets of instructions and sets of relationships. So there was an analysis of the Piranesi and my desire for certain. Captain Dust, the word Captain Dust comes from Dustin Hoffman. Hoffman in Dutch means captain, and dust is dust. And the reason I like Dustin Hoffman is he plays so many different characters. And so, sorry, I can't do anything unless I have some dumb joke in the back of my mind that guides me. So I think it would be idiotic. So I think of it as a master plan. I really do think of it as a solution to the city. It has a high level of order, and it works pretty easily urbanistically. It works better than the, but it's not. It has to evolve. It requires time. And so when I first started teaching at the DRL, not the DR, the GDG at the time, we had one problem only, and that is there were lots of new towns that were being developed, but the goal of all of them was to have the qualities of an evolved city. So the point was, how do you design and build a city in 18 to 20 years or 40 years, like Milton Keynes, that had the spatial complexity of London, And so all we were looking for was techniques to do that. And so that process came out of that. And I still think that should be the goal, but it still takes longer to build. For example, I didn't know this at the time, that economically to build a new town, you have to lay the entire electricity grid in immediately. And once you put in a grid of the electricity, that's going to determine location relationships far more than, if it takes time to develop, you can do them one at a time, you can afford that, then you get London. So it's really hard not to have the infrastructure, the actual infrastructure, water services and electrical services, take over the master plan before you can do anything. But so in the end, who designs the building is going to be less important to me than that. It won't have time to accrete complexity, but I still think that's the goal. And but I do think rules are interesting. But there's a place, for example, there's nothing in my mind against vector primitives. My mind is index as authenticity. I don't mind curves, and I don't mind work done in Maya. What I mind is it being used as a way of authenticating the value of the project. So Jesse Reiser's Sagaponic House, I don't know if you know it, it has a fantastic curve in it, but it's not indexing any forces at all. It's a fictional force, and it begins, I think, the project, the same thing in Greg Lynn's. The post-indexical architects like Stan and Greg and Jesse are people that are beginning to introduce the idea of a fictional form, and then the question was, how do we start to produce fictional fields in relationship to that? So we moved from the cosmopolitan field. So I think, for example, Seattle Library is a cosmopolitan field project. It doesn't bring Seattle in. Let's say like Cincinnati, Zaha Cincinnati is a fantastic urban field project because it specifies Cincinnati and then brings it in. And has very strong phenomenological presence. Brings the carpet in as concrete, strong weldings on, It's very present, and it means to be related to that. When you walk into Seattle, you walk into Seattle Library, you walk out of Seattle. You walk into anywhere else. Every product is from another place. The outside fake garden turns into a carpet. Everything about that building is to tell you you're no longer there, and thank God you're no longer there. And even better than that is Nouvelle's concert hall in Copenhagen. That is a building that says there's something rotten in Denmark. Because you walk in, you walk through a temporary thing, you go up this thing, and you go into Sharon's concert hall in Berlin. I mean, so we are working very actively to delocalize locality in a very interesting way. And the best way to think about that is to kind of fictionalize both the form and the sense of the field condition. I think that's sort of where we are. That's why there is so much potential in this work. I honestly think that it's actually worried it isn't going far enough, and what it's not doing is it hasn't made a catalog of its powers and started to figure out how to apply them to lots of other projects. As far as I'm concerned, the DRL should already be a consulting organization. It shouldn't be worrying about preparing people to do their own projects based on this work. It has so much knowledge and it has so much problem-solving ability that it should already be consulting as, inexpensive, low-end consulting to possibly solve problems on any possible kind of architecture. Like today we were talking about a project that made a choice between a certain kind of behavior and another kind of behavior instead of scripting every one of those things and just having that as a possible catalog. So, and that's what I think should go on in the kind of work. That's where I think we are, and that's how I think, that's how we'll handle stuff like the building type problem. You raise your hand to me. You talking to me?
Well, I think the trajectory you've just been on, I subscribe 100% to it, and I would also claim the concept of the jungle as a model and the Leibniz quote. So I don't think it's something to recognize as a premise for our dialogue.
Yes. Of course, Patrick, you're my hero.
I rather like your notion of the Cambrian explosion, and the way you combine it with the idea of frictionless physics, and I think we're beyond that for more than 10 years.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, I think the Cambrian explosion was, you talk about is early 80s to late 90s, and now we have, even starting mid-90s, we have burdened this explosion of ideas and techniques and speculations and tools with increasing number of task frictions, universalizing it, explored on different scales, while of course the proliferation of techniques and options is also continuing, but they now feed into something which is aiming at something and aiming at serious work. And I believe that therefore this picture of all these music types represents perhaps this era of early 80s to mid 90s, and I see this kind of convergence and think that the trajectory we are on has an internal richness and complexity, but now bracketed through a series of principles which we're not falling back behind. So I don't think it's about getting tired or bored with, but pushing further and redeeming.
Yes.
Now, but I think what I look at, the work you've shown, I find very interesting. It coincides with some of our agendas of focusing in on perception, the idea of figuration, the figurality you've been exploring. I really like that. And my question with respect to that would be, and I love also, by the way, this idea of a non-local contextuality, which is that where images associate network of similitude are not tied to localities and spatial relations. It's morphological network of similitude. They are inherently non-spatial, but as a dimension of organizing built environments. Now, and I have a lot of sympathy for the way you show these figures, and I agree even to the extent that some of our figure reading is related to the sense of balance, body, like a sculpture, heaviness, balance, and so on. My only question is why and where I wouldn't step in. For instance, the CCTV RAM would fit perfectly in this.
Yes. In fact, he's on the. He's
But
one of the,
and what I would avoid,
Mm-hmm.
and we always have these issues, is basically to push the figurality to the point of representing the figures. I mean, I'm there where I would be critical of. And do you think it's necessary?
No, no. In fact, there's a lot of. I don't know if you saw. There's lots of.
The
just
human
pure-
figure. Yeah.
On the Biennale model, and I encourage everybody to fly to. You got 2 months. It's really cheap. There's the CCTVs on there. Lots of pure abstraction in every mode. So I just started. I picked 3 for this because right now, it was important for me to relate to some of the stuff I did at SciArc and those guys, and it was easy. Those guys were there. But I don't know if you saw, one of the figures is a giant construction crane. Basically looks like a construction site. So I mean, as long as there's something that allows it to participate in a partial narrative.
You know what I feel?
Because one thing, because
It's the wrong narrative. That's why this ends
is.
up this. That's
yeah.
it.
Oh, and
I think
to go back to that and to have everybody say, "Oh, it's Hayek again." I mean, I understood what I was getting into. You pick the most easily discredited thing. And I'm so used to being wrong. What's one more time? I mean, I feel so sorry about what I said about collage. I just want to go around and apologize to collage people all over the world. Let's do some more collage, guys. And I got everybody to do all this index and school of fish stuff and swarming stuff, and I'm so sorry about I spend my whole life apologizing to people. But now I got to apologize because I forgot my sentence. International style was an idea about non-local contextualism. In other words, it was a success. The problem was it was a mind-numbing power success. There's no reason, I keep thinking, I don't want a Chinese posture in China. You got to be really careful that this doesn't become, So I do like old, new, drunk, I like there are drunks in China and there are, that sort of stuff. I want, and that's why the difference between the body and the figure is crucial. So there are 3 concepts in neurology that are now considered to be hardwired. They are, I learned them today on a phone call from Sanford Quinter. Never go talking about science until you call Sanford, and no, he won't show up to counter it. Okay. Pareidoia. Pareidoia is seeing faces or figures in the clouds. Apophenia. Apophenia is the brain's tendency to find order in anything, no matter what. And hierophany. Hierophany is the feeling of religion or theology, and it turns out all 3 of those are hardwired, evolutionarily hardwired as survival mechanisms. So you will, so to tap into those, that's what the Bill Hilliard stuff, that's what I was talking about earlier stuff. If we are hardwired to make those 3 kinds of mistakes as part of our survival mechanisms, and we are magicians, we aren't scientists, then to understand those and keep them secret, and learn to work with those things, that's a fantastic power. So to go back to the figure to explore the limits of those, and by the way, that's why I think I would rather my figures take 2 or 3 years to get discovered rather than 2 or 3 minutes. So slowing it down, it's a whole process, but I understand the dangers and you're completely right about it. And thank you. Good night.